Hello, my name's Indy. I used to live with my sister's family. For 3 years, I raised her kids, cooked their meals, paid their bills. Then one day, my niece looked me in the eye and said, "You're just a guest here now. We need space." No warning, no gratitude, just a quiet shove out the door of a house I helped keep standing. They changed the locks, moved my things into the garage, said I was lucky to stay as long as I did. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was whose name was on the deed. And what happens when the guest stops playing polite? Would you have left quietly, or made them remember you weren't so easy to forget? I stood at the edge of the kitchen, holding a plate of deviled eggs, the condensation from the plastic wrap clinging to my palms. Callista was just outside the archway, her voice bright, clear and practiced as she introduced herself to a new couple who had just arrived. Friends from her marketing job, I guessed. "And this is Indy," she said, gesturing vaguely in my direction without turning her head. "She kind of lived with us for a while. She's like family." Kind of. That was the word she used. Not my aunt, not the woman who raised me when Mom was sick, not the one who picked me up from every soccer practice for 3 years because my mom had night classes. Just kind of, it sliced sharper than I expected. The couple nodded politely and offered me a tight smile. I gave them one back, the way you do when you're acknowledged but not really included. The kind of smile you give when someone introduces you like the help. I slipped back behind the fridge and busied myself with repositioning trays on the countertop. I didn't want anyone to see the flush creeping up my neck. I wasn't embarrassed. No, that wasn't the word for it. I was something colder, numb. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon. Isolde always did like to impress. I recognized the place settings she pulled out, the gold-rimmed plates from the china cabinet, the ones our mother used only on Thanksgiving. I hadn't seen them in years, not since Mom passed. I drifted into the living room. The walls were covered in photos, carefully curated and color-coordinated. Not one of them had me in it. There was Callista on her graduation day, Callista with her boyfriend, now husband, Dorian, Callista and her twins in matching flannel pajamas. But no Indy. I scanned for something. Anything. Even the old one of the three of us at Lake Ontario, with Isolde squinting into the sun and Callista in floaties. But no, it had been replaced with a blown-up black and white of Callista in front of a faux brick wall, holding a cup of coffee like a lifestyle influencer. I spotted the gift bag near the mantel. The navy paper, silver bow. I'd spent 2 hours putting it together, choosing the exact notebook she'd mentioned in passing weeks ago. A vintage leather-bound journal from a little shop near Monroe Avenue, the kind of thing she'd never buy herself. The tag was still there, but my name wasn't on it. I didn't say a word, just watched as Callista walked over, picked it up, and carried it to the center of the room. "Okay, last one," she said, shaking the bag like a game show host. "This one's so me. I can tell already." She reached in, pulled out the notebook, and gasped. "Oh, wow," she said. "Mom, did you get this? It's perfect." Isolde beamed and nodded as if she'd handcrafted it herself. Callista crossed the room and hugged her. "You always know what I like." I just stood there, clapping with everyone else, wondering what it felt like to disappear that cleanly. Later, I rode home with Dorian. He drove, eyes straight on the road, the hum of the engine and the wind, the only things filling the silence. I glanced at him, searching his face for something, maybe guilt, maybe recognition, but there was nothing. He was neutral, polite, silent. He pulled into the driveway, shifted the gear into park, and sat for a beat before unlocking the doors. I reached for the handle, paused. "Good night, Indy," he said, like I was a guest checking out of a hotel. Inside the house, I kicked off my shoes and sat at the edge of my bed. The streetlights flickered through the window blinds in dull stripes. I opened my purse, pulled out the receipt for the notebook, and tucked it in the back of my journal. "I was never just kind of anything," I whispered. It was the way she said it, plain, direct, without flinching. The word hung in the air between us, not loud, not cruel, just permanent. "Auntie, just so you know, we're thinking of redoing this space. You're kind of just a guest now, so if you could move your boxes." She said it while standing barefoot in the hallway, her tone as casual as if she'd asked me to pick up milk. My hands froze on the lid of the storage bin I had just opened. I didn't speak, not because I didn't have words, because I didn't trust the ones that were forming. That night, I waited until the house had gone still. I slipped into the kitchen, turned on the low counter light, and sat at the table with my laptop. It had been a long time since I'd needed to dig through old bank records, but the memory of how to trace my digital footprints came back quicker than expected. Every grocery run, every appliance I'd ordered, every automatic bill pay I had absorbed into my pension check. I didn't need these receipts for confrontation. I needed them to remember I hadn't imagined it all. The next few days were colder than usual, not the weather, but the air in the house. The thermostat, which I used to adjust freely, was now locked at 66. My favorite hazelnut coffee no longer appeared in the pantry. My seat at the table, the one closest to the window, was quietly filled by a new vase of faux eucalyptus. The boys didn't seem to notice. At 5, their world revolved around blocks, snacks, and bedtime stories. Or at least, it used to. I began packing at night. Slowly, quietly, not just to be discreet, but to be deliberate. Each labeled bag felt like a confession. Linens, cookware, photocopies. I tucked away my Instant Pot, the one I bought after Callista complained about dinner being too slow with the twins. It had served every stew, every rushed weeknight meal. I didn't bother asking if she'd miss it. One evening, as I folded an old sweater into a tote, Callista stepped into the room. She didn't say a word, just looked around, her eyes landing on the stacks, the empty shelf where the books used to be, the suitcase by the door. Then she walked out. It wasn't silence that hurt. It was that her silence held no question. The next morning, I helped the twins get dressed while Callista rushed around the kitchen, tapping her phone and muttering about a late grocery delivery. As I knelt to zip up Mason's jacket, he tugged at my sleeve and asked, "Aunt Indy, how come your bed's in the garage now?" I froze. My hand rested on the zipper, unmoving. He blinked at me with the kind of unfiltered honesty only children have. Before I could speak, his brother piped up, "Did you get in trouble?" I smiled gently, not too wide, just enough to buy a moment. "No, sweethearts. Just making more room for your adventures." I kissed the top of their heads, stood, and turned toward the hallway. I didn't wait to see if they understood. Maybe one day they would. By late afternoon, I found myself standing in the backyard. The sun had already dipped behind the neighbor's roofline, leaving the grass bathed in a pale silver glow. The boys' toys were scattered across the lawn, plastic swords, mismatched boots, a deflated soccer ball. I stood there with my arms crossed, not from the cold, but from the ache beneath my ribs. They hadn't kicked me out, not exactly. No doors slammed, no shouting match, no "pack your things and leave." No, it was more sophisticated than that. They'd just edited me out. First the seat at the table, then the room, now the name on the gifts, and soon it would be the memories. They didn't push me out all at once, I murmured to myself. They faded me like an old photo. The wind picked up, rustling the branches of the bare tree overhead. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the sound of my mother's voice in this backyard, the smell of her cornbread, the heat of summer cookouts where I was the one manning the grill because everyone else wanted to stay inside. It all felt distant, like someone else's story. I walked back into the house, stepped around the stacked bins, and made my way to my room, if it could still be called that. I sat on the edge of the mattress, opened my notebook, and scribbled 4 words: document, pack, duplicate, disappear. If they wanted me gone, they'd get their wish, but they wouldn't get my silence. I didn't need a public announcement. I didn't need Callista or Isolde to say it with words. I saw it everywhere, in the absence of my name, my place, my history. But if they weren't going to say it out loud, then I would, even if it was just to myself. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I noticed it. I was dusting the living room shelves, something I still did out of habit. My fingers traced the edge of the fireplace mantel as I adjusted a crooked frame. That's when it hit me. The photo from Thanksgiving 3 years ago, the last one with Mom, was gone. It used to sit front and center. Isolde with her wine glass, me holding the carving knife, Callista laughing with cranberry sauce on her blouse. We weren't posed, we weren't styled, we were real. In its place now hung a glossy, oversized print of Callista, Dorian, and the twins on a ski trip. Everyone wore matching red jackets and photogenic smiles, the kind of image you pay extra for to look effortless. I stared at it for a long minute, then turned back to my dust rag. That evening, as Callista passed through the hallway holding a laundry basket, I asked casually, "Hey, what happened to the Thanksgiving photo?" She didn't even pause. "Oh, I think Mom moved it to storage. We're updating the vibe in here, trying to keep it cohesive." I nodded slowly. My voice didn't rise. I just let the answer sink where it landed. Later, I sat on the edge of my bed and scrolled through social media. I didn't go looking for pain, but it found me anyway. Callista had posted a Throwback Thursday photo carousel. Birthday parties, beach trips, Christmas mornings, all carefully chosen, perfectly lit. Not a single one had me in them. Even the ones I remembered being part of, somehow cropped or filtered just enough to edge me out, like I was a coffee stain in a white living room ad. Then came the slip-up. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. A group text, mistakenly sent my way. It was from Callista, meant for Isolde. "Once she's gone, we can redo the space. Imagine it lighter, more open." I stared at the message, toothbrush halfway to the sink. My stomach flipped, not because of the content, but because of the tone. It wasn't angry, it was logistical, like planning a room remodel, like removing a rug. I didn't reply, I just took a screenshot, saved it, filed it away. By the next morning, I was looking at my reflection differently. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way people expect. I was narrowed, focused. There was something surgical in how I began to observe the house, the things that had changed, the traces of myself being covered or discarded. Callista had replaced the entryway mat, the one I bought at that arts fair in Syracuse, gone, swapped with a beige choir mat that read, "Grateful." Oh, the irony. The kitchen corkboard, once pinned with recipes in my handwriting, now only held flyers for community yoga and daycare schedules. I started making mental notes, then real ones. One afternoon, I took a walk. Not far, just to the nearby CVS for more printer paper. On the way back, I passed by the local elementary school. The kids were out for recess. The sounds were sharp. Squeals, laughter, soccer ball thuds against chain-link fences. A group of moms stood near the gate, sipping iced coffees, chatting about summer camp and allergy-friendly snacks. I watched them for a beat. Then I turned and walked faster. Back home, I opened a box in the closet labeled Thanksgiving 2020. It had been taped shut since the move. I slid it open, peeled back the layers, and there it was, the missing photo. The original print, not a copy, us. The last year we all felt like something close to whole. I dusted off the glass with my sleeve, stared at the image, and whispered, "You don't get to erase me this quietly." A few hours later, as twilight crept through the blinds, I framed it in a cheap black border and placed it in my room. Not on the wall, not yet. Just leaned it gently on the dresser, facing my bed. A reminder, not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd carried. I didn't sleep much after reading that letter. I placed it beside my bed, flat against the nightstand, so I'd see it first thing when I opened my eyes. And I did. Before the sun fully rose, before the coffee started percolating in the kitchen, I lay there staring at the ceiling, running over every moment, every small shift that had led us here. By mid-morning, the house had resumed its usual rhythm, Callista pacing around with her phone to her ear, the boys yelling over cereal, and Dorian fixing the leaky faucet he'd been ignoring for weeks. I stayed quiet, let them forget I was there. That's how they preferred it now, anyway. I was heading to the laundry room when I heard Isolde's voice from down the hall. She was on the phone, her tone light but edged with authority. "Yes, we finalized the estate. It's just between Callista and me. No, Indy lives here. She's fine." I stopped in my tracks. My grip on the laundry basket tightened. I leaned gently against the wall, careful not to make the floor creak. The call ended shortly after, and Isolde hummed her way to the kitchen as if she hadn't just carved me out of our mother's legacy with a single sentence. That night, after dinner, I found her alone in the sunroom folding towels. The lights were low, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish. "Hey," I started, keeping my tone soft, controlled. "Did you talk to the lawyer already? About the will?" She didn't look up, just kept folding. "Yes, we sorted it last week." I thought, Mom wanted everything split equally. Isolde let out a short laugh, thin and brittle. "Indy, come on. You've had more than your share. You've lived here rent-free. No mortgage, no rent, no bills." I nodded. Once, tightly. Right. I left her with her towels and walked back to my room, barely aware of my own steps. Her words didn't sting because they were sharp. They stung because they'd been waiting to be said for years. The next afternoon, I walked to the corner store. I needed a break from the house, the walls that were beginning to feel like they were closing in. I grabbed some envelopes and a pack of printer ink. As I left the checkout counter, I heard a voice behind me. "Indy, that you, sweetheart?" I turned. Mrs. Edna, our neighbor from 2 doors down, stood with a bag of frozen peas and a look of surprise. "I thought you moved out ages ago," she said, placing her groceries on the counter. "Your sister said you were just staying temporarily after the divorce." I blinked. "What divorce?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, honey, I just assumed. Maybe I got it mixed up. I'm so sorry." I shook my head, gave a polite smile, and left before she could fumble another word. I hadn't even been married. Back at home, I stood outside on the porch, the ink and envelopes still in my plastic bag. I stared at the bench by the garden, the one I'd painted 2 summers ago. It used to be a faded gray, chipped and ignored. I'd sanded it down, stained it walnut brown, and stenciled a floral pattern across the seat. It was still there, though now partially covered by a potted plant Callista had recently added. The tag still hung from its rim. Clearance, $5.99. It hit me then. I hadn't just been forgotten. I'd been rewritten. In their version of events, I was a visitor, a temporary inconvenience. Someone who used to be something but had since overstayed her welcome. I went to my room, locked the door, and opened the drawer where I kept old paperwork. There it was. Dad, Silas, written in thick black ink across a worn folder. I pulled it out, sat on the floor, and spread the contents across the rug. There, folded in the middle, was the letter I hadn't read in years. "Indy," it began. "I know you've always felt like you were in the background, but don't let them erase you. This house, no matter what they say, will always have your name on it." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I sat still, holding that letter, letting it anchor me to something more real than the silence they tried to stuff me into. That's when I knew silence wasn't going to save me anymore. The next morning, I brewed a single cup of coffee, black, no sugar. I didn't bother checking the pantry anymore. I knew the hazelnut creamer was gone, and I wasn't about to ask for it. I drank it slowly, standing in the same corner of the kitchen I'd once painted myself, back when I still thought repainting a wall could change a dynamic. I spent the day quietly, no music, no conversations, just sorting, not decluttering, not spring cleaning, sorting, the kind of organizing that felt like proof of existence. I labeled folders, printed receipts, cross-checked Amazon orders from 3 years ago. If someone looked over my shoulder, they'd think I was preparing for an audit. In a way, I was. I packed books I hadn't touched since the twins were born, the ones I used to read aloud while rocking them to sleep. A blanket my mother crocheted. A framed photo of me with Dad at my high school graduation, one of the few he smiled in. The house moved around me, unaware. Callista took work calls on speakerphone like always, peppered with sentences like, "I'm juggling too much," and "No one appreciates what I do." Isolde rearranged the spice rack and sighed dramatically each time she passed me. Dorian stayed neutral, present but blank. He'd mastered the art of disappearing while still in the room. By late afternoon, I was stacking boxes in the hallway when Callista wandered in, barefoot, holding a half-peeled orange. She stopped short when she saw the open suitcase. "If you're packing already," she said, not with worry, just mild curiosity, "does that mean you're leaving?" I turned to her, calm, even. "Thank you for showing me my place," I said. "I won't forget it again." She didn't reply, just stood there for a beat, then tossed the orange peel into the trash and walked out. The kitchen, for once, stayed silent. I stood in the echo of it for several seconds before I zipped the suitcase shut. That night, after dinner passed with the usual awkward silences and choreographed small talk, I waited until the house settled. I grabbed my purse, the folder marked Dad, Silas, and walked to the library a few blocks down. They closed at 9. I had time. At the back of the library, I found a corner desk, slid the letter from the folder, and placed it on the scanner. The copy machine hummed quietly. I made 3 duplicates, one for safekeeping, one for what was coming, one I didn't know yet, maybe for myself. I reread the letter under the fluorescent lights, Dad's handwriting, rough and deliberate, like every sentence had to earn its place on the page. "This house will always have your name on it." He'd written that without knowing how much I would one day need those words, not as comfort, but as a boundary. By the time I got home, the lights were out. I moved carefully, quietly, no footsteps heavy enough to start a conversation. In my room, I slid the copied letters into my desk drawer and took out another folder I'd begun a few nights earlier. Personal assets, the label read. Inside, I placed printouts of utility payments from my bank account, screenshots of purchases, fridge magnets, furniture, light bulbs, the Instant Pot, the kids' Halloween costumes, every piece of my presence I could quantify. Then came the hard part, putting emotion into order. I wrote down dates, circumstances, the day I paid the daycare fee when Dorian lost his job, the time I covered Callista's emergency dental bill, the month I kept the power on because they forgot to set up autopay. None of it was about the money anymore. It was about the revision of history. At midnight, I placed the folder under my bed where I used to keep old journals. I looked at it one more time before turning off the light. "They're going to learn what forgetting costs," I said softly, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. And as I drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that the very next day, the first move would come from them. I didn't expect much that morning, just a simple grocery run. I picked up eggs, a small bottle of olive oil, and a bouquet of discounted tulips I didn't need, but bought anyway. I lingered by the magazines longer than usual, trying to delay going home. But eventually, I returned. When I stepped through the side door that led into the garage, I froze. Boxes, my boxes, were stacked sloppily near the tool rack. My winter coat was half tucked between a cracked storage bin and a bag labeled donations. On top of everything sat my quilt. It had been folded, but not well. A streak of dirt ran across one edge, like someone had dragged it along the floor. I walked over slowly, as if approaching a crime scene. The quilt had come with me from my first apartment. It wasn't beautiful, muted blues, some threads fraying, but it was mine. My mother stitched it before her arthritis made sewing impossible, and now it sat here, in the garage, like lost luggage. I opened the lid of one box, cookware, another, my novels, another, photo albums. Every item I'd stored neatly in my room now crammed into plastic bins, stacked without care. My heartbeat stayed steady. No yelling, no fists clenched, just that low, quiet current of disbelief. Callista appeared in the doorway holding a protein shake and wearing that expression that said she was already tired of whatever conversation this was about to be. "We just needed the space," she said, shrugging. "We're converting your room for Dad's back therapy setup. The twin stuff doesn't fit downstairs anymore." I stared at her. "You moved my things, without asking." She blinked. "We figured you were packing anyway." I didn't reply. I didn't nod. I just walked past her, stepped into the hallway, and went straight to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me, not because I needed privacy, but because I needed a buffer between myself and what restraint was left in me. Later that evening, around 6, I came home from a walk. The sun was slipping behind the trees, casting a sharp gold light through the branches. I reached into my coat pocket for my key, pushed it into the front door, and nothing. It didn't turn. I tried again. Jiggle, press, push. Still nothing. I stood there, silent, my hand on the doorknob. A minute passed, then another. I knocked lightly. Dorian opened the door halfway. His face was pulled tight, guilt bleeding through his polite mask. "Oh," he said, "we changed the locks this morning. For security, Callista meant to text you." "Of course she did," I said flatly. He stepped aside to let me in, not meeting my eyes. I walked past him without a word and didn't stop until I reached the garage. My boxes were still there. I sat on the bench beside them, knees together, fingers laced tightly in my lap. So that was it. No more illusion of space, or home, or inclusion. I'd been moved out, and now I'd been locked out. That night, I sat in the garage under the dull flicker of the overhead bulb, rereading Dad's letter. The folds had softened from being handled so much, the ink fading just slightly. "This house will always have your name on it." I smiled, not kindly, not wistfully. The kind of smile you wear when you've stopped asking and started deciding. Sometime after midnight, I returned to the main house to grab my charger. The hall was dark, quiet. I passed by the twins' door, cracked open. Their tiny snores steadied my breath. Back in my room, no, the garage, I opened my phone in private browsing, searched listings. One short-term furnished studio, 4 miles away, pet-free, month-to-month lease. I reserved it under my maiden name. Next, I booked a rental van for the weekend. Just enough space to hold what was mine. Nothing more. I didn't add moving help. I wouldn't need it. If I was just a guest, it was time I chose my own exit. By the time Friday rolled around, my resolve had settled into something firm and steady, like concrete. No rage, no panic, just decision. I spent the morning sorting final details, checking the rental van confirmation, and confirming with Cambry. She texted back a simple, "I'll be there. We'll make it clean." I believed her. It was mid-afternoon when I got the notification. A friend from the church circle, someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, tagged me in a TikTok. My name stood out like a flashbulb. I clicked, thinking maybe it was some old memory. Instead, it was Callista, polished, styled, beaming as she gave a tour of the kitchen. "This space," she said to the camera, "was my dream. I handpicked every appliance. This is where we gather, where I pour love into everything I make." Behind her, center frame, sat the Instant Pot I bought the year the twins were born. The air fryer I picked out during the Black Friday sale because she said she didn't have time to cook. The knife set she once said was too fancy to splurge on. I didn't comment, didn't message. I saved the video and slid the phone into my pocket. That evening, after dinner plates had been rinsed but not dried, I called Dorian into the living room. He hesitated in the doorway. I showed him the video without a word. When it ended, he cleared his throat and said, "It's just a video. You know how she gets with image stuff." I stared at him. "That's not the point." He shrugged. "I mean, it's not like you ever asked for credit." I didn't answer. I walked past him and went to the kitchen. I pulled open the bottom drawer and began removing the cookware, each piece I'd bought, paid for, and used. I placed them gently into a cardboard box. No clanging, no fuss, just motion. Next, I moved to the shelves, the measuring cups, the mixing bowls, the blender, one by one, like clockwork. I heard the shuffle of Callista's slippers as she entered the kitchen, paused at the doorway. "What are you doing?" she asked. I didn't look up. "Taking what's mine." "You're being dramatic," she said flatly. I stood, dusted my hands. "No, I'm being accurate." She folded her arms. "We need space. You're just a guest here now." That word again, guest. I nodded once. "Exactly why I'm leaving." I continued boxing without waiting for another word. Her footsteps retreated, leaving me alone in the rhythm of reclaiming. By the time night settled over the neighborhood, my half of the kitchen was bare. What remained looked like a showroom, nice but lifeless. I stacked the boxes in the garage next to the bins they'd shoved there earlier that week. My Instant Pot sat on top, lid secured, cord coiled neatly beside it. Even the rice cooker, once declared too old-fashioned by Callista, had a spot. I took a breath, texted Cambry, "Tomorrow, noon, no delays." Her response came almost instantly. "Got it." Vans gassed up. I stood there in the quiet, the only sound a soft tick from the overhead bulb cooling above me. Then I walked back inside, washed my hands, and sat at the kitchen table one last time. The dining chairs had already been rearranged for better flow, according to Isolde. I no longer had a designated seat, so I picked one at the end, the one with the stiff back that nobody liked. I didn't mind. I pulled out a small notepad and pen, wrote a single sentence, "Not for them, for me." I folded the note, left it on the counter. No signature, no fuss. Then I turned off the kitchen light and headed to the garage, slept there by choice this time, next to my things. They didn't just lose their aunt, they lost their backbone. The sky was pale with early light when I opened the garage door. Cambry's rental van rumbled into the driveway right on time, just like she said. She stepped out wearing jeans, gloves already on, eyes sharp and focused. We didn't hug. We didn't waste time on long greetings. We nodded at each other, and that was enough. I handed her the list I had written the night before, items categorized, labeled, documented. She looked it over, nodded again, and we got to work. No shouting, no dragging, no chaos. Every box was lifted with care, every bin placed in the van with precision. Books, appliances, small furniture pieces. The air purifier I bought when Callista said the twins had allergies. The knife set she once called too expensive. The Instant Pot that became the heart of every rushed weeknight meal. We emptied the garage first. Then I stepped inside for the kitchen sweep. The house was still asleep, or pretending to be. No one came to stop me. I moved through the kitchen methodically. Blenders, measuring spoons, spice rack, all mine. The coffee maker with the cracked handle, also mine. I unplugged it gently and wiped down the counter before setting it in the final box. From there, I walked to the dining room. The light fixture above the table, brushed brass, modern design, I had paid for it during a clearance sale 2 Christmases ago. I pulled a chair over, climbed up, and began unscrewing it. The small screwdriver clicked softly with each turn. I heard a door creak upstairs, but didn't pause. When the fixture came loose, I wrapped it in a towel, placed it in a box marked Fragile Dining, and sealed it with 2 strips of tape. Cambry appeared beside me, hair tucked behind her ears. All set in the van. I nodded. Almost. I walked back into the kitchen and laid a manila envelope on the center island, carefully, like setting a final dish at a long overdue dinner. Inside was everything. A notarized copy of the property deed with my name in print on the lower left corner, legally recorded years ago when I helped Mom refinance. Copies of the receipts for every item I had taken, the original letter from Dad, and 1 short typed note. What I paid for, I took. What you discarded, you may keep. No name, no signature, just truth. I stepped back, took one last look around the room where I had spent hundreds of hours, pouring coffee, comforting kids, standing at the sink while everyone else disappeared into their own lives. And then I walked out. Cambry opened the van's passenger side door. I climbed in without a word. She shifted into gear and eased the van forward. I didn't look back at first, but when we reached the end of the driveway, I turned my head. The front door was now open. Callista stood on the porch in a robe, arms crossed, jaw tight. Isolde was behind her, half hidden, wearing that same neutral face she always wore when she wanted to be blameless. Neither of them moved toward us. Drive slow, I told Cambry. I want them to watch every inch leave. She didn't ask questions, just pressed the pedal gently and kept the van steady. We rolled away, quietly, smoothly, with no sound but the turn of wheels over gravel and the faint creak of the shifting load behind us. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Freedom didn't come with fireworks. It came with silence that finally belonged to me. The studio smelled faintly of lavender, the morning sunlight filtered through the linen curtains. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The chipped countertop had character. The old radiator hissed when it started up, and the closet door creaked like it was announcing itself every time I opened it. But none of that mattered. The silence here wasn't empty. It was mine. I stood in front of the tiny fridge and taped a note to the door, one I'd written the night before on the back of an old receipt. This space is mine, no permission required. I smiled as I smoothed the corners down. Every item I unpacked from the moving boxes had a memory stitched to it. The coffee mug from the art fair Callista never wanted to attend. The wooden spoon Mom gave me when I first moved to Albany. The Instant Pot that had cooked 100 meals in a house that no longer wanted me. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, but it held something the other place never did: peace. By the second day, I'd fallen into a gentle rhythm. Morning walks to the corner bakery, afternoons at the library, evenings spent reading with the windows cracked just enough to let in the scent of the city settling in for the night. And then the voicemail came. I wasn't expecting it. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized the cadence of her voice before she even said my name. "Hey, Auntie. We didn't think you'd actually leave. The boys are asking about you. The kitchen feels weird now. Just thought you should know. I guess that's it." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. That night, Cambry came by with boxed wine and a tin of oatmeal cookies. We sat cross-legged on the floor with our backs against the futon. She took one look around and nodded. "You look lighter," she said. I sipped from a plastic cup and laughed, because I'm not carrying a whole house on my back anymore. We talked for hours about grief, about letting go of people who swore they needed you until they didn't, about the quiet strength it takes not to chase closure, but to build something better instead. "Some roots rot from the inside," she said, tearing a cookie in half. "Doesn't matter how strong the trunk looks." I nodded. Sometimes it's not about fixing the soil. Sometimes you just plant somewhere else. The next afternoon, I walked to the park near the apartment. It was small, mostly benches and uneven sidewalks, but it had trees that knew how to offer shade without crowding you. I watched a grandmother reading aloud to two young kids, her voice soft, melodic. The boy leaned into her side, and the girl corrected a word with glee. I didn't feel envy, just recognition. Some things I gave freely. The bedtime stories, the doctor's appointments, the dinners that kept the fridge from echoing. Some things I'd keep only in memory. Back at the studio, I stood in front of my small bookshelf and placed my father's letter in a new frame. The glass caught the fading light just right. I read the line aloud once, letting it settle into the walls of this new place. "This house will always have your name on it." It didn't have to mean the building anymore. It meant the life I built. The parts I kept, the parts I left behind. I sat at the window with my tea and watched the sun lower over unfamiliar rooftops. They'd remember me, not when they needed a sitter or a bill paid. They'd remember me when the house got quiet, too quiet. They'd remember me not when they needed a favor, but when silence made the house echo. Sometimes, silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. Indy didn't fight to be seen. She simply walked away and made sure they noticed the absence. So here's the question. Have you ever been treated like a guest in a place you helped build? Share your story in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life revenge stories that speak to the heart.